Welcome to the Creative Community. I'm your host, David Starkey, and my guest this time is Mariano Zaro. Wow, it's great to have a poet of your stature here on the Creative Community. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for your invitation. Thank you very much.
Well, we're going to be talking about your work both in English and Spanish. And I'm always curious, as a fellow poet, about how you ultimately, or how you became a poet. How did you wind up there? This is not the best career necessarily for a person.
I think many writers may agree with me that everything starts in childhood. I grew up in a family with a lot of talking and a lot of storytelling. My father will tell stories of his own childhood. He was born in 1917. He went to the Civil War in Spain.
Oh, wow.
My mother was born in 1920. So it was, they were talking about a time that it was a little bit very much remote for me. I was born in the 60s. So I grew up in this kind of big fishbowl of talking, not only my parents, also neighbors, family members. And so I think that oral tradition of people talking and telling a story. And I think if you want to tell a story as a child, you have to have a good story, because otherwise they won't pay attention to you. So I think that was my first school, that my family. And then I went to the university in Zaragoza. I studied literature there. I started writing and publishing in some magazines in Zaragoza. But I have to say that only until I came to California in '91, that's when I kind of started taking writing more seriously. I took a class at UCLA Extension with Philomene Long, one of the beat, or the last of the beat poets in Venice. And she's the first person that treated me as a poet. Like, she will say, yeah, because we poets. And it was the first time maybe I am a poet, maybe I want to. So that was my, I think, the first time I realized, well, maybe there is something here to explore seriously.
Well, you're talking about growing up in a family where there's a lot of storytelling. I'm always curious about why someone becomes a poet rather than a writer of fiction or something like that. When did you was it later on that you kind of figure out you were a poet instead?
I try both. I wrote and I still write short fiction, but it's like a love story. I think my love story was and still is more with poetry than with short fiction or fiction in general. I don't think I have the talent to write a novel. I find it too difficult, but not that writing a poem is not difficult.
Right.
But I think I have more skills to write a poem than to write a novel. But I have written some short stories. Yes.
Well, let's, for people who don't know your work, would you mind starting off? And this is going to be a poem both in Spanish and in English.
Yes. This is a poem from my book, The House of Mayrim, La Casa de Mayrim. Mayrim is a small town in the north of Thailand. I spent a few weeks there, and then when I came back, I started writing these little poems that were inspired by that trip. So this is the opening poem of The House of Mayrim, and I'm going to read first the English version, then the Spanish version. At the door, a still shadow the size of a coin. I don't know if it's a leaf or an insect. Suddenly, it opens its antennae. Maybe that's why I came here, to remember astonishment. Ante la puerta, un bulto quieto del tamaño de una moneda. No sé si es una hoja o un insecto. De repente extiende las antenas. Quizá para eso vine hasta aquí, para recordar el asombro.
Wow, it's beautiful. I'm always, as someone who travels quite a bit, I'm always wondering how to write about a place that you've only been for, say, a couple of weeks. is it something about not knowing the place thoroughly that gives you the opportunity to create your own magic, or do you? I mean, talk about that process.
In this particular trip was my first time in Asia, my first time in a Buddhist country, and it was very exotic. So everything was new.
So you're just writing.
Yeah, everything was new, and I think. There is an element of, when everything is new, there's an element, a big element of discovery, and you become a child and you learn how to say this or that, and that discovery for me is connected to the act of writing. When you write a poem, there is an act of discovery in the poem itself, and also with naming. I think when you are in a different culture and you learn how to name things, that act of naming is very close to the act of naming when you are writing.
Right. Yeah, that's a great analogy. So, do you have two poems from that book?
Yeah, I can read.
I'd love to hear while we're still
yes.
have that first one kind of.
Yes.
In
So
our
this
minds.
is something else. What happened with this book is, I think before this book, I wrote a lot of poems about my own life, my own misery, my own problems.
Like all poets.
Like all poets, probably. And then when I went to Thailand in that trip, something shifted, and I started looking at people. So this is a poem about a woman. We went to her house in Mae Rim, and this is the poem I wrote about that encounter. She tells us that the house is from the 18th century and touches the raw wood of the walls. We see the kitchen and the bedroom. There is a picture of her husband on the night table, and she asks if her daughter will be ready now to know everything about her father. We don't stay inside much longer. She takes us to the garden where her daughter sleeps under the porch. She must be 14 or 15, is barefoot, and wears a black swimsuit. A grasshopper jumps on her shoulder. It's a big grasshopper, almost as big as her hand. The mother lowers her voice, but doesn't do anything, leaves the grasshopper alone, and continues talking about the garden, the house, and how difficult it is to raise a child on your own. Nos dice que la casa es del siglo XVIII y toca la desnuda madera de las paredes. Vemos la cocina y el dormitorio. Hay una foto del marido en la mesilla y nos pregunta si su hija estará ya lista para saber todo lo de su padre. No estamos dentro por mucho tiempo. Enseguida nos lleva al jardín, donde su hija duerme bajo el porche. La hija debe tener unos 14 años. Está descalza y lleva un bañador negro. Un saltamontes se posa sobre su hombro. Un saltamontes casi tan grande como su mano. La madre baja la voz, pero no hace nada. Deja en paz al saltamontes y sigue hablando del jardín, de la casa y de lo difícil que es criar a los hijos cuando una está sola.
I'm interested in, this is a bilingual book. Are you composing the first version in Spanish or English? Or?
For this particular one, I had this idea of composing the poems, or the two versions at the same time. So I will start maybe with few lines in Spanish, I will do the English version, I will continue with the English version, do the translation to Spanish.
That's fascinating.
And it's a good way to edit, it's a slow process, but it's a good way to edit a poem, because when you do the translation, you see immediately what is unnecessary. That when you compare the two versions, there are many things that it's easy to see, oh, this doesn't belong here. So it's more like like a braiding.
Yeah, it's a braiding, a dialogue.
Yeah, like a dialogue with the, and the dialogue.
Or a prize fight.
Yes. And the dialogue filters the poem. So that was the intention with the poem. So I had like a double entry journal, and I did both versions.
I love that.
Yeah,
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, as I listen to the poems, they're both so incredibly precise and imagistic. I mean, I'm getting so much from what I can see and to a lesser extent maybe hear or smell. Is that just crucial to your project as a poet?
Yes, I think seeing or listening or feeling in general, but to be to be precise, not to use anything that is unnecessary. Also to feel what the poem needs, because sometimes as poets, I think we have our ego gets in the way, and oh, let's say this because it's very beautiful,
Right.
or because it's sounds very intelligent. And I think there is an effort on my part to be sober in that
Right,
sense. Okay,
right.
is this necessary in the poem? Let's go ahead and do it, even if it's
If
not.
it's not,
Yeah,
snip
yeah.
it out. Yeah. Well, you know, we both are college professors, and I know a lot of times when I'm teaching creative writing classes, students will argue to me that, you know, the more general and vague it is, the more likely that people will put their own experience in it. And I don't think that's true at all. I think that if it's general and vague, you just don't pay attention and you back off. Would you think that's
I
the
agree.
case? Yeah.
I think being specific and helps the reader, because it's like well, it's the art of connotation. If something is very specific and very private, produces a connotation in the reader. If it's very general, there is no echo. And of course, if it's too evident, I mean, there's you know, as a poet, if you are too evident, there is no room for the
Right,
reader
so
to enter
you
the
need
poem.
some ambiguity.
Yeah, so you need a little space. I call it the gap. You need a gap between the reader and the poem, so the reader jumps. You know, this leap of faith.
Right.
Like, I'm gonna do this gap
Right.
thing. So
If
that's
they
when,
don't jump, then
yes, and
there's no
in
problem.
the leap, that's when the poem happens. If it's too close to the reader, too generic,
Right.
too accessible, then there's no leap. And
Right.
if it's too complicated, the reader doesn't bother.
They'll leap, but they're gonna fall down
it's
the
gonna
chasm.
fall or it's just you will look at it as something beautiful, like fireworks.
Right.
It's a beautiful composition, but there is no involvement.
You're not going to engage in
Yeah.
a really kind of serious way.
That's right. You don't engage.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Well, I want to keep hearing more of your poetry. So I think the next book that you've got up is 3 Letters.
3 Letters. The story behind this book is a little different. This is I wrote this book in Spanish, only in Spanish.
Okay.
And I tried to do the English version. I tried to do the double entry journal. It didn't work. This book didn't like that.
Why not?
I don't know.
Just
it didn't work. It was too. It became too contrived when I tried to do it, like too intellectualized. So it didn't work. And it's one poem in 15 segments. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna read the opening segments of the book. And I'm gonna do the Spanish. This time I'm gonna do the Spanish version first. And the English translation is by a poet, a Los Angeles poet. Her name is Alicia Vogel-Sainz.
Okay.
Te espero en el mismo hotel de Barcelona después de 15 años. Me visto esa mañana, camino, tomo un taxi, cruzo calles, ensayo qué decirte, te imagino. La gente se desplaza, cursa, transita. Me sorprende que no se desorienten en laberinto de aceras, que puedan entenderse, respirar sin saber que te espero, que hoy, tras 15 años, el destino perdona breve nuestra ausencia. Tú, lejos, te vistes, caminas, tomas un taxi, subes a un avión, abres un libro, escribes en los márgenes con tu letra puntiaguda, pides zumo de tomate sin sal, con hielo, te duermes, aterrizas. I wait for you in the same hotel, Barcelona, 15 years later. That morning, I dress, walk, take a taxi, cross streets, rehearse what I will say. I imagine you. People exchange places, cross, pass. I am surprised that no one is disoriented by sidewalks' labyrinth, that they can understand each other, breathe without knowing that today, after 15 years, destiny briefly forgives our absence. You, far away, dress, walk, take a taxi, board an airplane, open a book. With your sharp handwriting, write in the margins. You ask for tomato juice, no salt, with ice. Sleep, land.
Well, that one is interesting too. I'm thinking about conversation that translations have with one another. So the first half of the book is the Spanish version.
Yes.
The second half is
the-
the English version. Whereas in the previous one, we had those facing page
Yes.
translations that maybe people are more used to. How does that affect one's reading of the book, do you think?
Well, I wanted this book to be more like the Spanish version first and the English version after that, because it was conceived as the book in Spanish, and then the English version after that. And on the other books, I preferred the side by side because they were conceived more like twins, like twin versions. And I have to say also that. Alicia did a very good job in the translation because she used a very kind of constrained or succinct language, and I did some changes after I read the English version.
Oh, did you?
I went back to I said, you know what, I can delete this. These articles are not necessary. Maybe this can go. Yeah, I did a lot of, not a lot, but I did some changes after her English translation. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, and in that, I have very poor Spanish, but I can hear the music of the Spanish version, and I can hear the music of the English version. That's pretty incredible, I mean, this one, you are the translator as well, but that's that's not something that happens every day.
No, I was very lucky with Alicia. We met in some, dinner party.
Right.
And her mother was from Ecuador, I believe, yes. And so
she was a native Spanish.
She was a native, yeah, her father was from somewhere, I don't remember, but she was a native speaker. And but she writes in English. She writes only in English. So I did a couple of translations of her poems from English into Spanish. Okay. And then I said, well, maybe I have a project. I have a project for you. And she was very generous.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Well, we've just talked about 2 books here, but you have some more coming out, and I wrote Decoding Sparrows in October of 2019 with our great friends down in LA, What Books, and then Padre Tierra, which is being published in Spain,
yes.
Only in Spanish.
Only in Spanish,
right.
Yes.
So can you read some stuff that's coming up in the future for us?
The Decoding Sparrows is coming, as you said, is coming in October, and the book has a lot of memories of my days as a child in Spain, growing up in a little town. My father was a farmer, so the opening poem is a little vignette of my father and myself. So this is the opening poem of Decoding Sparrows, and it's called Plums. My father wraps plums with newspapers. I cut the pages in half. He wraps the plums. We are in the attic. It's summer. We don't talk. He rolls the fruit. His fingers twist both ends of the paper. It's raining outside. The plums look like wrapped candy. He's meticulous. Not too meticulous, just enough. The plums have to be without nicks or cuts, firm, not too ripe, unblemished. The storms have been coming all afternoon. That's why my father is home. He couldn't go to the fields. He ties the plums with a thin string, like a necklace. 5 plums in each string, exactly 5. I don't know why. His hands inspect the fruit, twist the paper, tie the knots, do the math. I hide my hands under the newspapers. He is on a ladder now. He hangs the strings from a wooden beam in the ceiling. I pass the strings to him, one by one. Sometimes unintentionally, my hand brushes his hand. He leans his body against the ladder, rests for a moment, cleans his sweat. My father is old. The strings dangle from the ceiling, plums in waiting like dull, modest Christmas ornaments. Fruit for the winter, he says, as if you could wrap the summer with newspapers, as if you could wrap your father's hands for the future days of hunger.
There's a line in there, he is meticulous, not too meticulous. And I mean, that seems to me to sort of summarize not just his character, but also maybe your poems too. You know, you are meticulous, but not to the point of fussiness.
Yeah,
or
that's.
anything like that.
Thank you. I would like to think that I am that in my poems I am meticulous, but not too meticulous.
That's a good sort of aesthetic for all of us to aspire to.
Yeah, well, it's a good compromise.
Yeah.
Yes.
What is your father still alive?
No, my father died in 1992.
So a good long time ago. What is it like for you to write about a parent who's no longer here?
Well, I have written a lot about my father because I have the feeling that, I mean, when he died, I was I think 29 or 30.
Young,
30.
Yeah.
So, but I was an adult, so I had a life. It's not like I wasn't a child, but I had the feeling when he died that I didn't understand him completely. Like my father, I always say my father became more alive after his death. So I had a lot of conversations with him after his death. I have learned a lot from his life after he died. So there are many poems about him, and trying to be on his shoes, on his life as a farmer, the way he understood nature, the way he will read the clouds, the trees, the color of the grass, all that I am very ignorant about it. And the book that I have another book coming out in Spain. It's called Padre Tierra, Father Earth, and the whole book is a conversation with my father. It's almost like the conversation I couldn't have with him. So through literature, I was able to have that conversation. Yeah.
We just have about 5 or so minutes left, and I know you have at least one more kind of longish poem. So I'd love to hear at least one more poem from you. You pick out what you want to read.
So I'm writing a new collection that is taking language from science, biology, medicine, even linguistics, languages that are not, or like poetic language, whatever poetic language is. So there's a lot of borrowing. So this poem is called On a Silver Tray, and it takes language from medicine.
Okay.
So this is the poem, and this is from a new collection, still untitled. It's called On a Silver Tray. The world has become heavy, I tell my doctor. A door's handle, a page in a book, an empty glass. I want you to see this, she says. She points at the black and white image on her computer screen. She wears a wedding band, but I don't want to know anything about her. I don't want her to have a husband, children, parents, siblings. This is your spine, she says, from C1 to L5. Do you see these spots? Yes, I say. What are they? Sadness, she says. Are you sure, I ask? It's a clear case, she says. The location, the shape, the density. Some patients present transparent sadness. We call it type 0. Very difficult to diagnose, even using a dye for contrast. Yours is translucent, type 1. And it's shaped like pellets, you see, very common in type 1. Type 2, the opaque sadness, is shaped like filaments that run alongside the muscle fibers. Type 1 stays close to the spine, may cause weakness, trembling, paresthesia, night sweats, sexual dysfunction. There is also type 3, is web-shaped, settles around the neck. Patients describe it as having a bridle around the throat, produces speech impediments, sometimes muteness. The last identified sadness is called inner type, she says. It generates in the amygdala. It looks like a rain of electrical spores that can reach any part of the body. Does type 1 explain my symptoms, I ask? We can't be sure, she says. We are still in the early stages of research, but sadness explains many things. What should I do, I ask? Some patients try to rest more and calm down, but sometimes they fall into hypersomnia, she says. Balance is everything, she adds. Some patients cry. Some play sports because of dopamine release. Some listen to music, Bach most of all. I don't like sports, I say, but I like Bach. What do you do with your own sadness, I ask. I just keep plowing, she says. Will I improve, I ask. You will, she says, but there is no cure for sadness. It stays with you always. What about future sadness, I ask. We will cross that bridge when we get there. Do you pray, meditate, she asks. Not really, I say. How can the body function with all this sadness, I ask. Nobody knows, she says. But some scientists theorize that the body wouldn't be able to function without sadness. Just a hypothesis. Do you think we could survive a lifelong load of sadness delivered in a single day, I ask. She plays with her wedding band. Imagine all your sadness, doctor, at once on a silver tray, I say. All at once on a silver tray, she says, like the head of John the Baptist.
Wow, that is a really complex poem with this amazing conceit of sadness running along the spine. We just have about 1 minute left, Mariano, but I always want the guests to give a little bit of advice to people who are practicing their craft or want to. So in 45 seconds. What would you say to people who are writing poetry?
Read a lot, be honest with what you have. Ask yourself, is this what I need to say? So be honest with yourself. And also find a small group of people you trust for editing. So find a leader, a community of poets that will help you. Not people that are going to say, oh, you are great all the time, but they're going to give you honest feedback.
Right. They can say you're great once in a while.
Yeah, they can say that. So that will be my advice.
That's fantastic advice. It has been a real pleasure for me to have you on the program and to hear your poetry. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
The Creative Community is a co-production of CAPS Media and TVSB. It's produced here in Ventura with Phil Taggart and his fantastic crew. I'm your host, David Starkey, and we'll see you next time.